So everybody, thank you for coming out tonight to the second in the China and the Global Connectivity series, hosted by the McIntire Center for Global Commerce and East Asia Center, and hosted by the Virginia Venture Fund. If you haven't already, make sure you sign in using the link on the board, which isn't up yet, but will be up eventually.
Please use the mic.
Without further ado, here's a quick introduction of tonight's speakers. So Duncan, in one way, literally wrote the book on Chinese innovation, current chairman of BDA China, which he founded in 1994 after working as an investment banker for Morgan Stanley in London and Hong Kong. Duncan currently advises investors in China's technology and consumer sectors. Duncan is also the author of Alibaba, the house that Jack Ma built, the definitive work on China's e-commerce and technology giant, its founder, Jack Ma, and the forces and people that propelled its rise. The Economist magazine named it as a book of the year, and it was shortlisted as the Financial Times Kinsey Business Book of the Year. Shirley is Compton visiting professor of world politics at the Millen Center at the University of Virginia, where she also teaches in the politics department. When Shirley is not here at the university, she serves as an adjunct associate professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Prior to becoming a professor, Shirley became the youngest female managing director at Goldman Sachs, a record which she still holds. Her book, Taiwan's China Dilemma, was published by Stanford in 2016 and in Chinese in 2019. She's now researching 5 East Asian economies caught in the high-income trap and has a book coming out soon on the topic. It goes without saying that Duncan and Shirley are experts on technology and innovation in China in a time when not just the China-U.S. political relationship, but commercial relationship is especially relevant. Thus, all of us have a lot to learn from them tonight. So let's give a big round of applause for Mr. Duncan Clark.
Thanks for that introduction. Can you hear us?
Okay.
Mic check?
No.
Okay, good. How are we doing this? I think it's good.
Yeah, can you all hear me? I'm just allowed. Okay. It's the Duncan and Shirley show.
Hey!
So I thought I'll start off by letting you know that this is a very unusual talk. Since Duncan has written the book, well actually, even before he's written the book, we've never appeared on stage together. Duncan has appeared on stage with Jack and Joe and lots of other people at Alibaba together, but for the last 3 years, we've never had the opportunity. In the last, actually 20 years, we've never really found ourselves in the same place where we can talk together. So it's really a great delight since I've been here 10 years. After begging and begging Duncan, he finally decides to do so. And thank God it's not raining today. But Duncan and I go back way, way back. So we start off, I thought, by telling you all, because the BBF was really very, very organized. They already submitted 12 questions in advance of why we were there in the first place. So I thought Duncan and I would start off by talking about how we met as kids, just exactly your age, and how many of you are fourth years here? Most of you. How many are first, second, third year? Okay, so most of you. So we met a little bit after that. We met 1 year after, actually right after graduating from college. I'll let Duncan tell you first. How we met.
Yes, so we met actually at another financial firm, Morgan Stanley. So Shirley and I joined the same year in 1992, and we had our training together in New York.
That's right.
You stayed in the New York office, I guess, and later moved to Hong Kong. I was in the London office. A bit of an accent confusion alert. I'm British, grew up in England, New Jersey, and Paris. So it may move over the course of you. But basically, I ended up in London and then on in Hong Kong and Japan and non-Japan Asia. And within non-Japan Asia, there was this place called China that we never talked about. Back then, it was more about the Philippines.
Before you came, so the story goes back just like what you're all talking about. In those days, when we started investment banking, it was very mainstream. But what's not mainstream is to not go to business school, which Duncan and I also hold record in that. Basically, they recruit 120 people from these universities. And in fact, 2 months into my job at Morgan Stanley, my boss says, could you go to a place called Charlottesville? I said, what? Where? And that was the first exposure to BBA. As a 21-year-old kid, they sent me interviewing students who were basically my age. It was such a wonderful introduction to Charlottesville. But 2 years in New York, I was doing Japanese business, and Duncan's going to chime in on how important Japan was to our times. We're both basically babies of our time. I studied Japanese all throughout college, and my dream was to be a Japanese banker because China was not on the map. And as you probably remember, 1989 was Tiananmen. After that, there was no business to be done, and nobody was talking about it, and there was no office left anymore in China. So throughout the late 80s, we were trying to get into the business, and Asia really wasn't even my goal. I started off in New York. I spent 2 years in waste management, trying to talk to garbage collector in Queens, and trying to privatize the firms, getting these Italian families, having dinner, pasta dinners with them, convincing them to sell the business so that we could form a large public company that would focus on waste management. And that was my first start at creating something from nothing. There was no waste management industry, and we were trying to create it. And then I did Japanese business when the Japanese bought Sony, Rockefeller, and then promptly had to sell them all. So everything is deja vu today, if you will, in terms of bubbles. And after that, I soon met Duncan, because out of 120 analysts, they said, okay, 10 of you are going to stay, and the rest of you are let go. Well, let go is the wrong word. It was always the promise that after 2 years, you have to leave and find money to go to business up in Hong Kong.
That's right. And so I had a year in Hong Kong doing tech stuff around the region, and China, again, was really a blank spot on the map. To give you an example, when I moved there finally in the summer of '94, the whole of China had 200,000 cell phones. And cell phones back then in China were bigger than the laptops that you're on right now. They were called, the Dakar, the Gorbachev. They were for dodgy people, like waste management people. It was basically an elite. It was, and actually even fixed lines. Fixed lines, but there used to be things called telephones, and then you could dial. They were, the whole of China was like the Soviet Union and so on as a communist country would just not want people to get connected within the country internationally. It turned out when I moved to China in the summer of '94, there was this thing called the internet was first connecting with China at the academic level. So the Institute of High Energy Physics in Beijing connected to the Stanford Linear Accelerator. I didn't know that at the time, but I moved to China in that summer of '94 to work, I thought, for 1 year on this telecom China tech thing, which nobody else knew about. I did not go to business school. This became my business school. I like to joke that I went to HBS, because it's true. I lived in Hong Kong, then Beijing, and Shanghai, HBS. I saved a lot of money. She went to the real HBS. But I learned on the streets of China at that point, things started to move very, very fast. So fast forward, we'll get back to the past in a minute, but today, as you all know, how many, 1.3 billion cell phones, everybody has two phones, cats and dogs have cell phones, it's on their watches. The e-commerce market in China today is 3 times the United States. It's 55% of global e-commerce. It's going to grow to 65%. So we're all in a bit of shock to think of how backwards it was and how advanced it is, and we're concerned about it. But that growth, we're all basically in shock still. So we're in therapy here with you.
Yeah, we're just doing group therapy in public today, because yesterday at a dinner, the former dean of the college, Meredith, who said, oh, you know, since you and Duncan are here, I decided to finish reading the book last night. I said, what did you think? She says, if I were from Mars and you told me Goldman Sachs is a real firm, I would say you gotta be joking. What a stupid firm. Well, I said, thank you. You didn't say that Duncan and I are stupid for not having personal shares in Alibaba. But she says, exactly, what is the economics? And I have to go back and calculate a bit, because every day when people ask me this question, it's just totally ridiculous.
So Shirley hits my hair. I was working.
Working on board, getting moved to Hong Kong, re-establishing offices all over China. I moved to Goldman Sachs because I didn't think Morgan Stanley Beijing was. You know, they were actually very international, but they weren't determined. Whereas Goldman Sachs was totally nowhere to be seen. But when they decided they wanted to do something, they really did it. And they asked their clients for the top bankers to poach. And 3 of my clients at the age of 22 recommended that they poach me. So at 22, I was being poached. to triple my salary to go to Goldman Sachs and skip business school. I delightfully joined, but the sad news was they asked me to become a privatization expert. I said, what does that mean? They said, oh, we're going to send you to privatize Qingdao Beer, China Southern, China Eastern. I said, that sounds great, until I realized these are not real companies. They had hospitals and schools and no company, no corporation, no registration. So I spent several years doing that and said, I'm out of here. I'm just not going to get stuck in Guangzhou privatizing an airline, which took 4.5 years. That's how long it was run as
That airline's in-flight magazine for China Southern was named Hope. So when you flew China Southern, you would pick up the in-flight magazine and it was called Hope. So that gives you a sense of the turnaround that she would have had to have done.
Thank you. Well, so fast forward, basically in 1999, Duncan and I, our paths merged again. So to fast forward to a narrative that's asking us to yesterday.
Yes.
Today, Alibaba's market share is $450 billion. We'll ask you, what is the economics for Goldman Sachs? So in 1999, Jack decided to register his company after 2 of his previous companies went bust. So this is his 3rd venture, and he couldn't get anybody to invest in him. So he went around and found a few small funds, for example, a Singaporean fund, TDF, but they said, we'll invest in you, but could there be somebody with a big name? And another guy comes along and says, could there be somebody who actually has faith and give you really, a real round? So they looked around, and that's when I met them, literally days after they were registered. Well, it's Jack, and Kathy, and their friends. Kathy is his wife.
Co-founder.
And they had a little apartment in Hangzhou. But basically, we put in, let me just give you the worst case scenario if you want to hear really bad news from the Goldman Sachs chairman's point of view. We put in $5 million worth 50% in October of 1999. Today, 50% of Alibaba, 50% of $450 million. You can do the math, it's $225 billion. But that is not the right picture, because a lot of people have been writing about this on media saying that's the comparison. That is not right. Because if you own 50% of Alibaba, you have to continue with multiple rounds until IPO. In 2007 in Hong Kong, the delisting, and then 2015 delisting in New York to get to where you would be, for example, the richest man in Japan, Masa, he continued. But let's do the math in a more rigorous way. The rigorous way to look at the economics of this investment is at the time that we put in $5 million for 50%, it was worth 2.5 cents a share. Does anybody know the share price today? Nobody here plays dabbles
I'm
in the stock
painfully aware for reasons that we'll talk about. But I want to say.
Nobody knows Alibaba's share price. Yes?
$173.
Oh, you're looking at your Yes. Yeah, it's roughly $160, $170 a share compared to 2.5 cents. So it would be the greatest investment ever. But that is not the real story.
And it was for Yahoo. Of course, Jerry Yang famously took a big bet later, a few years later, after Goldman, and remains still Silicon Valley's biggest ever bet.
Chronicled this beautifully. We put in the $5 million, and the reason was I was on the fast track to becoming a partner. So the firm says, under $10 million, why don't you just go out and do what you want? So we said, okay. I said I wanted to invest in a dozen or 2 dozen technology companies in China. And the firm kind of said, what? Whatever. And so we did. But soon they said, a few days after we made the commitment, which Duncan's book chronicles very carefully, the firm says, this looks crazy. $5 million in the sky, and we don't even know what he's going to do with it, except that he used to own a yellow page company. So why don't you scale it back to 3.3 million? So in a few days, I had to get rid of $1.7 million, and I gave it to, actually, part of it to Fidelity, which made them one of the richest people in the world. But you probably don't hear about it. Why? Because Fidelity also said, yeah, we'll take some of it, but we don't really know what this company does and what he does. But we'll believe you, Shirley. And so we believe Goldman will make it great. So we're just going to put it in each of the partners' accounts. So today, there are dozens of Fidelity partners who are extremely wealthy for reasons they had no idea. They just got, their account just got put in a little bit of this shares, and that's really the craziness of 1999.
And I had met Jack in the summer of '99 in August. And again, as Shirley mentioned, Alibaba was his third company. Actually, his first company was called Compton. It was a translation business. And you probably know who knows nothing about Jack Ma? Well, good, my work is done here. But he had been an English teacher. Famously, he had struggled in high school. He struggled to get in college. He got into a teacher training college on his third attempt, and so he, was destined to be a teacher, English teacher, as was his wife, Kathy. But he was still selling stuff on the side. He was selling plastic carpets from a bicycle in Hangzhou. He would go to the Guangzhou Fair, buy plastic carpets and sell them. So he would go and pitch. This is the art of the pitch. You go to somebody, please buy my translation services. Like, we're not interested. How about a plastic carpet? So he was the hustler. He has chutzpah. He's an amazing individual because he doesn't know anybody. He didn't know anybody. He didn't come from money or power. So he's the anti-hero, which made him the hero. But he had people with him in that first translation business, who then followed him to his second business, which was this China Pages, like a Yellow Pages business, which was an internet business. It was so early, the internet wasn't even connected to Hangzhou, which is, back then was a few hours training from Shanghai. He was trying to sell to people like, a local company that wants to export. I'll get you on the internet. Like, what's the internet? Give me money and you'll find out. He's like, who the hell are you? So basically, it was very early to the internet, almost too early. He saw the power of it and the power to connect with exporters, particularly manufacturers in Zhejiang province. If you go to China, probably most of the things in this room at some point been made or traded in Zhejiang province. Like 95% of the world's Christmas decorations, you name it, gone. Food, or everything comes through the Zhejiang, every manufactured item. But all these local companies weren't selling overseas. They didn't even speak English. He helped them translate and put it on the web. So the early days of Alibaba was a business-to-business business. So this was not selling to individuals. It was helping, actually people like Walmart buy from China. So that was the original pitch of Jack. But around him, there were people who followed him from that first business to the second business, even a stint in Beijing when he had to go work for the government.
That's right.
And Alibaba, finally, his third business, by then it's 1999. I mean, the dot-com thing was well underway. There were other Chinese companies, Sina, Sohu Knitings, which were already starting to go public, and Jack was late. Jack was late to the party, and so he was very keen to meet people like Shirley through a guy called Joe Tsai, who now famously owns the Nets and has been in the story in the news a lot with the NBA stuff. That's a whole other angle to the story. But Joe Tsai also, like Shirley from Taiwan, but had been educated in the US. So that connection that you guys made opened up for a local guy like Jack and his team international capital. Goldman Sachs was the big validation to allow Alibaba to really hit the big time. So
I'll take it, do this really well.
Yeah,
I've only rehearsing for half an hour. Yeah, but so back, now that Duncan has set the stage for this guy who's failed so many times, and he and his wife totally have hope. They're completely confused about the business, but nobody really wants to listen. But he runs into my friend Joe. But to give you the other side of the story, because there's plenty in Chinese that have been written about how this happens from that point of view. But let me give you the other picture. The real picture, actually, one of our friends is writing a book about it. It's going to come out probably in the next 12 months. Sebastian Malaby, who is the Council on Foreign Relations and has written already 5 books. He's writing a book of the history of Silicon Valley. There's going to be a chapter about exactly what happened between basically 1999, what we're talking about, to now in China. But the real story, from my point of view, it was the merger of basically ideas from all around the world, young people like yourself, like me, who are trying to find the next big thing. American capital and technology that came and found a huge market, untapped. And the story actually is quite straightforward if told from this angle. Because by the time, as Duncan said, that I had stumbled upon Alibaba, we had already been one of the earliest investors in China, in NetEase, in Sohu, to a company called China Ren, which was trying to copy Facebook. But to be honest, all of them were copies. Why? Because I took the CEOs, I took these management teams to go to one place after another on 101 in Menlo Park. Basically, that was what this merger, this global idea, which is so different than today's decoupling. It was the merger of everything. We would see something happening in 95, 96, 97. By 1997, I already made a big investment in voice over IP in Silicon Valley that had immediately gone public and made the firm so much money that they were astounded. They said, what is this? So, of course, the US was already in a bubble that was soon to burst. But in China, this burst was very temporary. And I saw that as a big opportunity because I had spent already 4 years in privatization, realizing that privatization is so little profit for a firm like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. And it was so difficult. And there was so much corruption that is both written and unwritten that I realized it was going to put these American firms in very, didn't have quite the same kind of management depth or the technology. But the market, people who knew the market, there were plenty of them. But it didn't really mean that they could absorb the concepts. So we made all these investments by the time that I had met Jack. And the reason we invested in Jack, which is one of the questions you submitted, is actually quite complex. It's not the dumb love that you read in all these WeChat stories. By the time that we had met, in 1999, I had read over hundreds and hundreds of business plans. And you have to understand, in 1989, unlike today, where I think one of the big differences today, for example, before Meituan went public, the last pre-IPO round was $3 million. So we're talking about a time when before something public, the pre-IPO round was $3 million. So the real problem was that there was competition. People didn't want to take all this risk. And therefore, when a situation is very uncompetitive, it's actually very scary. It's like going to California 100 years ago. You have no idea what the enemy, where the risk, the political risk, the economic risk, the business risk, all of it. There's no Sequoia to call and say, what do you think about this guy? What do you think? Ask us, what makes venture capitalists look at a business plan? I can tell you, every business plan then looked the same. You copy and paste, copy and paste. One knows how to do that. And you want a team? Sure, we'll pick 5 of you here and put it on the paper and sort of edit the background a bit. And we'll look like we'll have a CFO, a CEO, and a business development guy. But usually that wasn't going to make it. What we really did was we went to see all the brick and mortar businesses that I think Duncan also covered. For example, the Li and Feng, the Asian sources. These are the real companies that have been doing it for 2-3 decades, trying to help people like Macy's go to Guangdong to look at plants, to find people to make T-shirts for them. And these were going to be replaced by the digital guys. That was clear in my mind. But it was impossible to convince the investment committee because they couldn't believe it. How can you replace Li and Feng? But for me, I thought the cost was so little. The firm could put, let's say, $100 million in 10 of these businesses. Surely one would succeed. Hardly realized how big they would all become. And we had very, very few failures, which meant that our due diligence was really quite incredible. But the due diligence was not on the company and their background, but it's to understand the entire landscape. So we were in discussion with Asian sources to buy 10% of their soon-to-be digital business that was exactly the same as Alibaba. And this story I've actually never told anybody. $1.7 billion was the valuation of this brick and mortar business. And Merle Heinrich actually has just sold his company 3 years ago to Blackstone. So he really was the king 20 years ago and lasted until he wanted to retire 3 years ago. But he said to me, Shirley, I've been doing this business, I'm the king, and I'm going to have a digital business. And I looked at the business plan, wow, it was just like Jack's business. But he was going to value it at $1.7 billion, and for 10%, how much would I have to pay for that? And I wouldn't even get a board seat, he said. I said, I don't know about this. So I said to Jack, how about, I run the board, I'm the chairman, and I own 50%. Jack says, oh, absolutely not. At which point I'll hung up. And let's just say...
You negotiated 60% for Goldman, right?
No, I wanted basically more than 50.
I don't negotiate with her.
Well, Jack to this day says that was the toughest negotiator he's ever had, but that's just because it was the only point in his life probably, actually for about 4 or 5 years, he didn't have any leverage. So the phone fell because actually I think it went into I was swimming.
You dropped the mobile in the sea.
That's right. I was in Stanley's swimming. It goes into, so I said, I'll forget about it, and that was that. It was a Nokia phone. But of course, he was hanging by the phone, desperate. Couldn't wait to call me back and say, absolutely, have control. And I think that's one of the smartest things Jack did. Because wasn't worried. And I can tell you at this point, I was already dealing with hundreds and hundreds of Chinese students who were back from Stanford already, who were starting businesses, including all the other businesses I invested in that I told you. And everybody wanted to hold on to control. But Jack was totally different.
So Jack from the beginning was a team player, as we heard. His wife was a co-founder, but also 16 other people joined. And I got to meet him in the summer of '99 in August in the small apartment in Compton, which, by the way, they still own and still use to launch new businesses, including Taobao and Alipay and various others. And you walk up the Silicon Valley garage, but it's an apartment because it's China, it's no garages, right? And you walk in, first they do all the shoes at the door, take your shoes off. So there was a certain odor as you walked in, and also instant noodles everywhere strewn around, and people were packed into the small apartment, which actually Kathy, his wife, had contributed to the company. The importance of his wife actually very understated to the company. And they were basically creating this business-to-business way for these exporters to find markets. And it was an extension of his early translation business, getting these people online and translating this stuff. Now, I was instantly impressed by him, one, because he wasn't dropping names. Everybody else was saying, I just came back from, Stanford, Harvard, MIT, whatever, and I know this person in the
But he
industry.
didn't really quite have a story to tell.
He didn't have a story to tell. He would tell you, I'm an idiot. That was his, I was like, dude, I know nothing. I'm useless at math. I don't know anything. It was so refreshing to meet somebody who was completely opposite from the cliche face, sort of puffing themselves up. So, and just surrounded by people who clearly adored him. To the point that when I actually went early in 2000, I went with him to speak at Harvard Business School. We were walking along the Charles River, it's freezing, and there's a camera crew with us. I thought that was odd. I said, is this from Harvard? They're arranging. It's this woman's been following me for 5 years. It was a classmate of his who he was going places. So literally he had his own camera, and the company was worth 5 cents at that point. So he had this weird sense of confidence. And he would say stuff like, in 10 years' time, we're going to destroy, eBay or whatever. And you're just like, but actually, somehow he was convincing because he had these people around him, and it was basically the feeling, the culture. Masayoshi Son, who we heard about in Japan, partly because he invested in Alibaba. He invests on his sense of smell. Like with those shoes and the instant noodles, I wouldn't have invested on that. Fast forward a few months, he got SoftBank to invest a lot.
I'll interject the story.
How do you tell us about that? You did that.
Yeah, so, Masa was as crazy now as
Masa from WeWork. He's in the press right now. But
Masa is Masa. So the WeWork Masa, as you said, but in our days, he was the Yahoo Masa. But Masa was as crazy as could be. And this is where, again, international capital was very important. Because even after we invested, and that's one thing, it's really different than if you join a VC and you go out to invest in China. You're usually in some club deal. You're looking at things that are a few $1 billion, and things are really very, very different. It's not like you're creating something. In those days, people ask me, why do you invest in these, dozens of companies, most of which actually went public or acquired? Our failure rate was very, very low. But it got shut down in 2001 after the bubble burst, which is also a primary reason why I left. I just didn't think that a firm like Goldman really knew they can't really distinguish when their marginal business is it's going to take off, because they were so concerned about their core. And this is one of the lessons that you need to have your own agenda about what you want to do. Everybody at the firm was against my doing what I was doing. But what I was going to say about Masa was like Jack, completely confident in his ability, and he was a madman from the start. But the reason that Goldman is so important is even after we put in the money, it didn't quite do the job of making great or anything great. It was still the same problem, that we had this business, every day we had a new business plan, every day we were moving into some newer business model. But what's really important is, as the internet bubble was about to burst, actually you could sort of see that it was a bubble. Goldman also got very, very nervous. The wonderful thing about a network is a network. So Goldman says, Shirley, we think you should sell all of your Chinese internet investment now. I said, now? We just invested, like this year, all of these companies. They said, now, just get rid of all of them now. And at that point, Goldman had become a public company, which is also a very problematic. The short-term vision of public companies is a very, very big issue in venture capital. And in venture capital, that is 5 years, or 5 plus 2 years, is very short-term for China. So Goldman said you have to do something. Either sell it right away, so our next quarter would be affected, or mark it up. I said, how the hell do you mark it up? So I said, good, I'm going to call Masa. So I go to Tokyo, and Masa says, so what do you have for me? I said, here's a shopping list. I put out all of my internet companies there. He says, well, which one needs like a lot of money? You can't just give like 1 or 2 million. That's not what we do. That's what you guys do. And I said, okay, very funny. He says, so you can read all about it, and there's a lot of interviews about how he decided. But the key thing was, he did put in the money. That negotiation, look, I'm really pushing the book hard, and it covers it extremely well. Because actually most of us have forgotten how we got marked up. But Masa decided in very few minutes to put in basically $20 million. And for that, Jack already learned a lot about negotiation from me. So he bargained really hard and gave Masa a very minority share for his $20 million. But immediately, my stake was marked up, and I was saved from having to sell the shares.
And this is when I started to realize I'd made a huge mistake by not buying the shares at 35 cents that I'd been offered, because I'm half Scottish and I thought that was too expensive. I don't.
The school is probably named after Scotland or Irish.
But the early business model, this business-to-business model of Alibaba, is still there. If you go to Alibaba.com today, that's what you see. It's businesses buying bulk stuff. It's okay. Today it's 0.5% of their total business. I was very excited about Jack and the team. I was a consultant to them over the years. Then he had a capital from SoftBank, and then within a few years from Yahoo. And that was building the consumer-facing e-commerce business. Now, those of you from China all know about Taobao, but basically Taobao is like a street online. It's like a street market. You can go up to little tiny stores, buy stuff, probably fake in the early days. Who cares? I'm not Scottish, I was buying a lot of fake stuff. It was great. And basically, it was free for the merchants. So eBay, famously, Hank Whitman said, free is not a business model. Because eBay, which started to become known as GreedBay or FeeBay, even in the US, was charging merchants to be on the platform. Jack said, no, it's free. The market has to be free. People come in. He figured out he'd make money from advertising. So you have your stall selling plastic water bottles, and you would do that for free, but you would have to pay for advertising to do this. And so Taobao's business model became advertising driven, and still is a massive business today. The second, third, let's say, genius thing, his initial idea, get the team together. The second was Taobao. Third was Alipay. So Alipay, basically nobody trusts anybody in China, still to this day. It's like one of the great things about the country is that you just have to always think of the angles, what's going on. If I pay somebody in advance for this water bottle and it comes back, it's full of petroleum or something, or it's poisonous. There was just lack of trust about the product and lack of trust about payment. So he launched his escrow service. I only released the payments when I got in my hands the product. So Alipay, which was also created in that little apartment in 2003, where he launched the original business, which came out, by the way, around SARS. So basically, everybody suddenly was at home because people were afraid to go on the streets. And so this idea of actually buying online suddenly became more attractive, and people started getting more broadband connections at home. So he timed it well. This was the big idea. This is why I should have invested, but I hadn't. But anyway. So this then propelled Alibaba to a much stronger position. They did actually list their IPO of their business in Hong Kong in 2007, which is one of these Hong Kong crazy situations, like when not the current Hong Kong crazy situations, I should say, but back in the day when it was the naive Hong Kong, when people would line up for Hello Kitty at McDonald's for like 3 days. People were lining up to buy Alibaba shares, even though they didn't know anything about the company. Jack already had been giving some speeches. He was developing a cult following, almost, we could say. But that IPO was the business-to-business model. Fast forward to 2014 in New York, that is still the largest IPO in history, the Alibaba IPO. That's including Alibaba. It's not including Alipay, because Jack took that out. That's a controversial name. But it's also including Tmall. So starting with the idea is, well, we can sell this stuff in China. The bizarre thing, when I was coming from China to the US in 2005-06, where would I go first when I landed? It was Target. I'm cheap. Target's pretty good upscale for me. I would go and buy stuff and take it back to China. You couldn't buy stuff made in China. That changed with the global financial crisis, because suddenly the export markets had dropped off, and the Chinese consumer suddenly started to be able to afford good products. And Tmall is where brands like Nike or wherever sell their own products, and they sell per commission. So Alibaba starts making a percent of the sale. So anyway, so you've seen how Alibaba has built out its business, now also with cloud computing, and we can go on into and the future stuff. We're talking about the future of tech innovation. But he really started with commercial innovation. It wasn't really technology. It was copied to China, C2C. But he modified it for the Chinese market. So he knew not to charge merchants because he had been a merchant. And like me, he's cheap. So.
And I think that's why Duncan wants us to fast forward to what are the lessons learned.
Answer
and
questions as well. Yeah.
Yes, and we kind of cover all
Yeah, sorry,
questions. Rehearsal so far is pretty good. We're making grounds. But I think the big thing that people always ask me to think about what make it different. I think a few things, and number one was, as I said, he was one of the few people who actually had a team. And when he tried to recruit my friend Joe, who actually wasn't part of the company, and he gave equity. This is very unusual because I was, by then, basically every week I was hundreds and hundreds of so-called entrepreneurs. Most of them are actually your age, and they're just trying to, wanting to be wealthy, but they really, really believed it, and you needed to have the stamina to believe in your ideas. And what I want to say here to add to what Duncan said is, after SoftBank invested, I went on TV heavily to promote Alibaba. What are we going to do with this company? Basically, we thought he was wonderful, the team was great, but he still looked like most other companies that I saw. But the difference is, if we invested in something, we believed, my team, I had a team of 33 really, really wonderful people, and we were at the forefront in the Goldman Hong Kong office, flying all over China to look at companies. We really felt that we participated and added value in creating these companies. So the first Alibaba board meetings were in my office because they didn't have an office in Hong Kong. But it's very different than when you do a passive investment with 5 other funds and you're just trying to work on valuation and term sheet. We're really in there through thick and thin. But a few months after we promoted the company and got the SoftBank money, basically the company almost went bankrupt. Internet bubble burst. Everybody was in trouble. And if you didn't have faith, basically you'd be like 3 other companies I had that basically went under. One of them was China Ren. As I said before, 3 Stanford MBA guys from China came back, one with super connections. You see the story. We were dealing with stories of success and failure at the same time when it's tough. It's when it's tough that you and your team will know what it means to have religion. And that was something I think we identified early on that was correct about Jack. He and his team wanted to do this, and they were market-facing. They knew everything about the market, and I think this is a big lesson. Today, of course, China continues to be very market-facing. So the big startups, the big success stories in China, I would say are still fundamentally market-facing, as opposed to the most innovative business concept. But the market-facing ability makes you knowing everything about the market, makes you highly innovative because only you understand the context. And you couldn't just get a management team. That was the other thing we experimented with. We got the best sort of management team from the West. And we did help with recruiting some of the CFOs, CTOs to come to China. It did not work. You needed the best people locally, whether they spoke English or not. And this is something that's really important. But you needed someone like Jack who could leverage that international network, and that's what we do, all kinds of things. So the second part is, China's, I would say, the big future for the next 20, 30 years is still market-facing. But the third part is, of course, there's so much policy, a lot of policy risk, and the policy risks are immense. If certain things were to happen, all would fail. An example of that is we basically created a VIE structure that many of you were asking about also in the questions that you sent. We invented it with Sullivan and Cromwell in order to get CNET.com to go public. And it was illegal. And to this day, it's still, of course, still around, which is really incredible. It's a real legacy. But you can see that the policy risk, if that were to be shut down, we would lose all of our investment. But that's the risk that we took. And I think the policy risk today, of course, is quite different.
And so, I just wanted to draw out on that. I mean, VIE stands for variable interest. I mean, you don't need to know about it, except that
I think they do, actually.
what they basically is a way of Western shareholders who have benefited the most because Alibaba is not listed in China, having shares in something in China, but the government still having the name of the licenses in, say, Jack Ma's name. So there's this weird arrangement where China has successfully retained control. There's the Great Firewall. We didn't talk about that because Alibaba itself wasn't really focused on the content business. So China is sort of having its cake and eating it too. It has built up this huge sector of telecoms technology without really giving massive foreign control. And yet, from the Western standpoint, Western investors, including pension funds, and, have actually participated in the growth of this tech revolution in China. Now, Senator Marco Rubio and others are now going after this connection, saying you've had your session, I guess, on Friday on decoupling, right? So part of the next evolution of decoupling might be to sever this Wall Street connection with China. That would be very damaging. I mean, maybe the decision the U.S. wants to make is going to hit the U.S. as well as going to hit China. But in a sense, what Shirley was saying, we're talking about consumer technology. Alibaba, it's commercial stuff. And the same with Tencent. Those of you who know Tencent with WeChat, reference WeChat, these are consumer-facing companies. It's not frontier technology, which is becoming more sensitive because there is neuralgia increasingly in Washington and surrounding areas about China catching up, whether it's defense or other aspects. The interesting thing is that these consumer-facing companies, Alibaba, Tencent, and also ByteDance, TikTok, right? They've become so big that globally they're players, particularly with data management. So I think we've ended a fun, naive time that we lived through where it was basically about people making money, it was entrepreneurs, it was happy. Now we're into, we are a sandwich in your mini-series between the decoupling and the Belt and Road. So that's politics, we're like the entrepreneur sandwich. So we like to be the meat in the middle. But increasingly, people are saying you cannot treat these companies, even Rubio and others going after Chinese tech companies like Alibaba and Tencent, saying they're an arm of the Communist Party, blah, blah, blah. So we've ended an era. I think our experience was, to some extent, the end of that.
Well, I guess I would to be more optimistic.
Yes.
Because I'm always faulted for being an optimist. As a political economist or as a venture capitalist, the investment community are always saying to me, Shirley, how can you always be saying these damn things that never come true? But it didn't come true in 1 or 2 years. That's the problem. The time frame is different for different people. You need to believe in whatever you believe in the time frame. But I would say that the flip side of policy risk is what I actually saw in 1997 when I started to do technology investment, despite Goldman's collapse at Google and Facebook and the likes, were not going to go to China. And therefore, there would be a huge opportunity. Now, you can say that's a big risk today with the decoupling, but let me give an example. Because of the trade war, actually Hong Kong is going to be more important than ever before. Because with the trade war, where are you going to find another liquid markets as deep and as vibrant as the Hong Kong stock market, as well as the entire financial system? So the policy opportunity that we had was that I thought for at least 20 years that the international leading technology companies were not going to come to China. But little did I know, what I'll tell you, it sounds like I knew what was going to happen. No, I did not predict that there would be so many policy opportunities that what Duncan talked about, Alibaba was able to get into payment and fintech in our wildest dream. But that's where you have policy opportunity because it's so, of course, regulated that you need to think about it. And I think that's the real lesson for me. Basically, being a great entrepreneur means every day you wake up, you have a new business plan. You have a new business. And so do venture capitalists really look at where you're going? No, what they need to look at is your conviction and your ability to stay with it, to stay with the market all the time. And today, with unpredictability in policy, I think that's the same for the U.S. as for China.
One last point before we take questions, maybe just to talk about your third topic in this mini-series, which is Belt and Road, which means different things to different people. But companies like Alibaba and Tencent, I already mentioned TikTok, are increasingly international. So Alibaba has a site called Aliexpress, which is very popular in places like Brazil and Ukraine and Russia, where people who cannot buy from Amazon or actually more price sensitive buy from China. So I didn't realize myself that this meant that Jack himself was a source of great interest to people around the world. So the book came out in 30 languages, partly because people, firstly, they want to know, why is this Chinese company called Alibaba? It shows that Jack is kind of an unusual thinker. It's not a Chinese name. And so even if the US, China, and even let's say the West-China relationship is getting more fractious, China itself is having a major impact through Belt and Road and government stuff, but also through entrepreneurs. I mean, Alibaba, Tencent, TikTok, these guys are investing in India and Southeast Asia. And, Didi, if you go to Costa Rica for next week, you can use Didi instead of Uber. It's already the number one in Mexico. So those of you from Brazil, you know this. Like Chinese capital and Chinese entrepreneurs are flooding emerging markets around the world. In Africa, Jack Ma will be in Africa, in Ghana, in a few weeks' time, in Accra, giving a prize to African entrepreneurs. So it's not just a US-China game. We have to not lose sight of the fact that China is making advances in other places, and how the US is going to handle this. Anyway, I think we should have some questions.
Yes, but I'm going to say, actually, I didn't realize it's my event. So please come to the Belt and Road Initiative event. I'm moderating, I invited all, so you must come. Because after the after story of Alibaba, of course, is I went back to school to get a PhD, having retired with too much time on my hand, and we decided that what we really need to do in the same room on November 15th, you can come to listen to two experts from Brookings and from OPEC talk about American response to the Belt and Road Initiative, and two economists, including the World Bank, come talk about what exactly is the Belt and Road Initiative as China expands all around the world. But I was just saying the story about Alibaba name, as something reminded me, as the founding board member, I said to Jack, his name absolutely has to go. And he says, why? I said, because when I told the investment committee we're giving you $5 million, they said, what kind of a name is this? It sounds like a joke. So I said, let's just finish the name. We've got to have a real name. So this went on for a while. So every time I hear the name, I just thinking those early days when everything he said and did sound totally ridiculous. But it's the believer that's involved.
All right. So we're gonna. Yes. Your moderator. Sorry. Thank you. Both speak very fast, so sorry. You can slow it down on the video if you choose to want.
So let's give a big round of applause to Mr. Syaru. And we're going to jump right into Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, raise your hand.
Thank you very much for this very informative speech. And I'm very curious about how will Alibaba change the merger and acquisition landscape in China? Because right now, most Chinese startup or venture capital, they are looking for IPO instead of selling to business. Then right now, as the development of Alibaba or this kind of big tech company, which actually have the money to do some long-term investment, how will it change the merger and acquisition landscape in China?
Well, actually, it was the case that many entrepreneurs wanted to list overseas, and still many do, because that's the gold standard. People think that's the ultimate exit, to list overseas. But it's getting more complicated, right? I mean, both now we have something called CFIUS, limiting Chinese investment in the United States, but also scrutinizing listings. I mean, this is what I talked about earlier with Senator Rubio and others, saying we're going to maybe deny Apple again. But now with the political situation in Hong Kong. So in a way, even before this political stuff, a lot of entrepreneurs in China say, I'm perfectly happy to sell my company to Alibaba, Tencent, if I make, $1 billion, I'm fine with that. So we've seen a lot of companies not necessarily created to sell to these companies, but ending up selling to them, either taking their investment or selling out. What's interesting about ByteDance, which owns TikTok, it did not take money from Alibaba or Tencent. They did the impossible, actually, because everybody said it's no longer possible. Like Alibaba and Tencent kind of rule, nobody can get by them because they have such scale. I mean, think how many WeChat users, like 1.1 billion people using WeChat. So any idea that you had with some little app, it's like they can easily replicate and roll out. So people basically said it would never happen. But ByteDance did something amazing with artificial intelligence and their short video services. But it's a bit like in the US, it's the gap, bang, whatever you want to say. Can you really compete with Facebook, Google, or do you just sell to them? And so the same debate about the platform companies or big tech is happening in China as in the US. And now the big question, though, is how does the government in China regulate Alibaba and Tencent? Just as how does the government in the US treat and regulate Google and Facebook? The difference in China is that because the China goes to Congress and was asked about what he does, basically you had Congress saying, how would you like us to regulate you, Mr. Zuckerberg? And there was that embarrassing guy talking about how do I use WhatsApp to watch Black Panther? What? So very strange. Like, China's a technocratic country. It's an authoritarian country, some would say more, but they do understand technology because they're using it. The United States, at the political level, is an analog government for a digital age. It doesn't really understand. And there are people trying to change that. I just met a young congresswoman the other day. Part of that Florida, and she's leading a younger congressional movement. But anyway, it's important to understand, to get back to your question, which I really went far from, is that M&A is absolutely fine. Increasingly, it's going to be difficult for companies to list. And China's own capital markets, we didn't talk about, but there is a stock market in Shenzhen and in Shanghai, and they've tried to start launching new forces, new ways. Star, they've had various iterations. The trouble is, like, most of the companies listed in China on the domestic stock markets are connected to government somehow. And even if they're not, you can presume that they are. How are they selected? How are they allowed to go public? So I think, you know, as you said, the depth of the United States capital market, it's not just the amount of capital, it's the institutional element. You know, when you look at the stock market, you look at retail buyers like us individually, and institutional buyers like Fidelity, you know, and you need that research. That sense that research actually matters. It's the know-how, not the know-who. China is still a lot of a know-who kind of trade.
I guess I would add to that, it depends on your perspective. The question, just looking at you and not to stereotype, so you could be asking 3 questions. 1, what's going to happen to the domestic merger market? So, you know, I'm thinking you're trying to do a startup, and you're thinking, should I sell one day, or should I, you know, join a Alibaba or a Tencent? And I would say that if you're looking at sort of this decoupled world, yes, the merger market in China is a little bit, I think, worse than the United States in terms of the oligopoly of the big companies. In our days, we didn't have that. It was so exciting to go to work because every day I felt like we were going to make 6 of you. 3 of them were going to say, let's sell out. And the other 3 could say, let's get $1 billion from or somebody, you know, and then, like, you know, let's wait it out. So this kind of discussion is very important in my view, and it's not really how innovation starts. And so unfortunately, you're in a situation where you either join a VC or you're doing a startup, and there's so many big companies, the 2 big ones in China, of course, set the tone, and then all the ones in the US. This is, I think, the discussion of our time. As a political economist, this is what I'm concerned about. And so the second part of it, so, you know, as a young person, do you want to join one of these companies? There's a lot to learn, whether you join Google or you join Tencent. And the second point I was going to make is what Duncan said. What I'm doing academically is, of course, focusing on U.S.-China technology. And CFIUS, of course, have rejected Alibaba's purchase of MoneyGram. Things of this, there's dozens of examples, as you know.
Grindr was blocked by, it was a Chinese-owned company, had to sell it because it's worries about.
And this is going to go on, I think, for the next 10 years until the United States and China sit down and say, let's talk about standards. Maybe have half the world, we'll have half the world. And the world is really here to stay. And for that reason, if you are graduating and trying to stay in the university, you're looking at a totally different situation. The US and the Chinese tech come one of the problems. The 2 systems are fundamentally incompatible in some ways in terms of the values, and whether they're good or bad is a separate question.
I found it wrong the other day to make a good point. We're talking about decoupling of the US and China. When were they ever really a couple? They weren't really, if they were hanging out, but they were never really a couple. So, you know, there's a sense of dramatization of this right now, which has political benefits. And it is interesting that both the Democrats and the Republicans are on this bus about decoupling.
Right. So the second question was, you know, the U.S. merger market, and the third point was the global market. From my macro point of view, is unfortunately we're not in the age where they're going to do any of those things that some people predicted. But I never predicted that. I always thought that they would remain separate, Europeans and the Chinese and the U.S. markets. And where they really are merging is basically basic R&D, and the most important leading edge technology still resides in the West. And this is made in China 2025. It's a separate discussion that we could have. Yes.
You're in charge.
Yes.
My name is Syaru. Do you ever think that China would nationalize these businesses? Like, on what timeline? Like, how would you feel about it? Like, is there fear of that, do you think, in China?
That's a good question, because when I started my business, I started my career as a privatization expert. So I was denationalizing. But this is on the back of, and you know, Duncan, of course, being British, can talk about it. This is after Reagan and Thatcher had pushed forward with, let's, you know, for example, in this country, AT&T was basically privatized. So I became a privatization expert. I actually privatized then the largest IPO in history, and that was Singapore Telecom. As part of the process, we gave every single Singaporean the right to buy shares. and this is before Russian privatization, and I did all these projects in China. So I went through this whole process, and I could tell you from my point of view for that decade of privatization, there was no way that Chinese would nationalize it in the way of going back to where it was in the 70s. But what we're talking about really here is not nationalizing the business, but having some control over the business. And this is what our Congress is dealing with. Do they have access to the data? Yes. Are they going to have more control over how these companies move forward? Yes. And that's why when I did venture, it was such a great time. We were so small, we were not in the policy. But of course, as the companies get bigger, they become part of economic statecraft. And so that's when I became an academic, and I said, where are the two countries going? And what will happen to the ideology, the values that drive privatization, which I did for a very long time, and what will allow the governments to have more control. And my view is in the United States, so, privacy is a huge issue in this country and in Europe. But in China, the attitude is entirely different, and I'll let
I think those of you who travel to China and you arrive and you don't have WeChat payment or Alipay, and probably the airport, that's it. You're stuck. Nobody takes cash. Credit cards. What's that? Because China's leapfrogged ahead. And the point is, the Alipay and WeChat's equivalent, Tencent's equivalent, really was a wake-up call to the state, the Chinese state. Oh my God, these private companies are huge now because. Literally could be, a threat to the integrity of the financial markets if suddenly there was an issue with the server or whatever. So, and actually, when Jack Ma's company launched a wealth management product, so instead of putting your money in the Chinese state bank, and they're all state-owned, and getting, negative or very low interest rates, suddenly they had a product called Alibaba, which is like leftover change. We will give you like 3%, 4% on your money. And they were expecting, a few people to put in money. It became, within 8 months, the largest fund management company in the world. Because suddenly, money was suddenly looking for a home. And Chinese have a lot of savings. They probably have too much savings, like the United States, or the West, we should say. But they don't have any outlets. That's why these real estate bubbles, or the state banks don't really care, about giving you a good return. So this is a wake-up call because the state banking system in China. That's really the instrument of control of the Communist Party, right? The link between the Communist Party and state companies and how that money gets allocated or misallocated, whether it's Belt and Road project, So that's why there was a wake-up call in China about these private companies can be really big, and they started pushing back. And now they're not allowed to earn certain interest on certain deposits now. They have to get out of certain businesses. So the big question today in China: what is the relationship between the state and the private companies, what Xi Jinping calls the non-state companies. You have the state companies and the non-state companies. So that's an important distinction. So while the book I think was really about East and West, Alibaba looking how do they beat eBay or Yahoo, whatever. That's like an East and West dynamic. I think today the dynamic in China is also a North and South. It's between Beijing and a lot of the industrial powerhouses are in the coast in the South, right? And so there's this tension between private business. And actually, last year, I think we saw the contribution of the private sector in the Chinese economy go down, which was totally unexpected, except because we had a new policy of revaluing state companies because they are instruments of control and stability. And China's concerned about stability in an uncertain world, so they're relying back on the old trusted tools, which is state independence. So.
And I think, the other thing I was going to add is Alibaba is 2% what remains of what I thought it would be, primarily because it's really a financial institution in many ways, and actually that's where my expertise now suddenly is. I sit on financial institution boards. I sit on Goldman Sachs Asia Bank board and an insurance company, a real estate company. So Alibaba now really is very much part of the policy.
We have some liquidity for you.
In that RMB is, of course, completely decoupled from international currency. And because of that, Alibaba is operating in cocoon. Whereas when we conceived it, and that's the biggest difference, when I conceived Alibaba as a company, it was part of the international global value chain. And today, it is completely a Chinese company that benefits, obviously, from separation of the financial system. And how soon RMB will internationalize is very much going to impact the business plan. So we're talking about an entirely different landscape and an established company, not, I would say, a pure form of a technology company. Please, yes. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I thought loud. What do you make of Kai-Fu Lee's assessment of the advantages that Shenzhen has over Silicon Valley, particularly when it comes to faster turnaround times and a more cutthroat environment of entrepreneurship?
Kai-Fu, you go first.
Well, hello, Taiwanese. Yeah, there's been a debate, not just from Kai-Fu, but also, Sequoia, like Mark say, in China, when people are working, 12 hours a day, 6.5 days a week, in Silicon Valley, it's having meetings about, when's the next ping pong tournament. I mean, it's an oversimplification, but it resonated in Silicon Valley. There was a sense, like I said, this neuralgia, this feeling, oh my God, we might slip behind. But also in China, it actually sparked a big debate. And actually, Jack Ma got caught up in this when people, and he initially weighed in and said, yeah, if you want to really make changes, you've got to last year, and you have to work hard. And then there was a bit of a pushback in China. So it's all right for a billionaire to say, I got to work, 110-hour weeks. But so there's a beginning of a change in China that we have, we don't have as many young people as we used. There's still a lot of people in China, but the average age is getting older, and people are looking, millennials everywhere are looking for different. So there's an element about the workforce in that. There's an element also about, is China really able to catch up or even overtake the United States in certain areas? And in certain aspects, because of the huge volume of data that is circulating on essentially 2 platforms, or maybe 3, with TikTok or Toutiao, China may have an advantage from this massive data. As I said, if everything is cashless, you can't use cash, and everything is recorded. Right now, when you use cash in China, it's like very dodgy. It's like, why? What's the game here? Because in a sense, China will have benefits from having this mass adoption of technology. The same for automation in factories, so 5G and IoT. The same for self-driving cars. In theory, they can have more adoption because they can mandate it. So there is a sense, and Kai-Fu played into that here, I think. And Kai-Fu's had some challenges in the US in the sense that people are pushing back, and he had worked for Google and so on and so forth. So yeah, the AI debate, which I think frankly AI is a little bit overhyped. I don't know if you felt that. AI means, I don't know what it stands for. Basically, value my business plan 10 times more than if you didn't have it. And that's beginning to deflate now. But yeah, I think he's pointing to something important, which is this mass adoption of technology and this technocratic approach in China may have some advantages in certain areas, which will give China an advantage and also more influence globally if people start looking at the China model. However, if you look at a number of core frontiers technologies, you can still see the gap. It's very big. And actually, why do the top, I think you talked about this, the top graduates from Tsinghua or Beida or whatever.
Because I teach in Tsinghua.
They want to come here. And that's another issue with the United States, with visa policy. They're denying visas or even suspending visa or access for PhDs to be here. There's an old saying, and I think it's a good one, that every PhD should come with a green card attached to it. That was something we were talking about. That we're not talking about that anymore. So, in this case, yeah.
I'll add to the Kai-Fu controversy. So I think Kai-Fu was one of the people who's more optimistic than I am. At least his book portrays it to me. And there's a lot of people who sort of always ask, his book makes it come out, of course, that China's AI opportunity is just so wonderful, plus the role of the state is benevolent. And as a political economist, I look at that question, and a lot of people ask the question, is that really so? Part of it, he's a player in the field, so there are some things that he wouldn't think about. So as a more critical observer, I would say that the role of the state is quite expansionary. This is what it really tells you. But a lot of people read it as benevolent. That is, that because of the state, that it's able to develop the AI market as much as it has.
Right.
And I'm agnostic about whether a bigger state being helpful to technology can be good or bad. Meaning, just because a state has more ability to organize and consolidate industry, it can be beneficial. But the way that China is doing it right now, I'm not sure. And so I think that Kai-Fu is now on sort of getting to the implication at the end of his book It gives you a very market-driven approach, and that's one of the things that for those of you who are not just interested in doing going to live in China and making your, big ambition come true, you want to look at sort of the implication, the philosophical aspect of it. You ask yourself the question, a government that has more control over technology, is that good or is that bad? And I think his book gives you one perspective.
So you mentioned earlier that in times of crisis, there are plenty of opportunities for both financial growth or loss that can arise. What are some of the opportunities that you've seen so far that might arise from the Hong Kong protests?
Wow.
Well, I just noticed that China has banned the export of black clothing to Hong Kong, so I'm not doing this out of any state. But, so yeah, who knows? I mean, actually, Huawei, you may have heard of, we did talk about, Tencent, the drones that you use, AI, and I could go on. And so Shenzhen already is kind of the second, and along with Hangzhou and Beijing is very important, not just politics. Shenzhen is getting a real boost anyway in terms of these amazing tech companies. It's a global city, actually, Shenzhen. It's connected, for example, most of the handsets in Africa come from vendors based in Shenzhen. There are now recently direct flights from Shenzhen to places you wouldn't imagine. So Shenzhen already is on a trajectory. It's right next to Hong Kong, but actually its airport now is suddenly a lot busier than the Hong Kong one because you can't maybe get there on the train because it's blocked. So I would say Shenzhen is actually benefiting, and actually, one country, two systems is a whole other political discussion for Hong Kong, but actually Shenzhen is firmly within the mainland, so I think we're going to see we're going to hear more and more about Shenzhen as a city. And already it's had very expensive real estate, like Hong Kong, but actually we've seen a rally because of the employees of Tencent making so much money, and so Tencent is also an amazing international company now with presence in gaming. And any of you who play online games, you're probably playing Tencent games, whether you know it at all. So Tencent,
in a very moment where I'm very, very pessimistic. There is nothing to gain from what's happening in Hong Kong today. And in fact, I'm going to out my husband. Professor Harry Hardy there from the Baton School is going to Hong Kong tonight in 4 hours at the invitation of Carrie Lam to discuss exactly this, Shenzhen, to discuss with experts, probably as a show of, the Hong Kong government trying to improve the plight for young people, to talk about the greater Bay Area, which includes 70 million people in Shenzhen and many other places, which will make Hong Kong only a small part of this, in order to have young people have opportunities to join startup, to join Tencent, and to be part of a larger economy. But Hong Kong students are really not interested. And there's a really very big gap between the young people's aspiration and what the Chinese government wants to do in the city. It's a totally different discussion. Harry and I did a Stimson Center panel September 25th. It's online, you can look it up. It was wonderful because we were on the panel with a historian going to this perspective that for 22 years the expectations that were delivered were actually had failed. And people were expecting more and more liberalization, and things have really changed. And Hong Kongers are really a distinctive group of people with unique history. So unfortunately, this is not what I mean when I say there's policy opportunity. In that this is really, and then Harry's the governance expert, public policy failure in all respects. The government is just not responding, and it's primarily young people who are really feeling the difficulty in a city where an average housing price is $1.04 million US, average apartment, and the average household income is $50,000. It means that for 21 years, you could basically work all day long and you will never afford your own apartment. So that just means you live with your parents forever and you don't get married and you don't have kids. So why do you want to work for a tech company? Why do you want to do anything? Life is without hope. And now they want to give you Shenzhen and Greater Bay Area so you and people are not interested. But I would say that the opportunity that Duncan talks about has already happened. Most of my students in Tsinghua, I teach in the Shenzhen campus and the Beijing main campus. Many of them work for Tencent, are millionaires, they've done really well. But I would say actually Shenzhen is at a bubble now, and it's not kind of, if you're thinking about next year you graduate, you're going to run to Shenzhen. I would not say that is a very good idea, unless you know exactly what you're about to do. Just hold on for 1 second. But the Hong Kong protest has led to about $3 billion now having gone left, which is very small.
Yeah.
So actually, it hasn't really happened, the capital flight. And the reason is because Hong Kong has a common law system that Shenzhen and Shanghai will not have. And therefore, the tax system, the common law system, the independent judiciary, and the fact that there's trust by the investors makes Hong Kong quite actually irreplaceable. And this is why I think for Beijing, I hope, will be signs of restraint, because it's very difficult to the city that is so important for all of China.
And we both benefited greatly from living and working in Hong Kong, and still, a place that I think we both love, and hope that things get better. As a Scotsman, again, there's good deals on Cathay Pacific right now if you want to fly to Hong Kong to go to your friends, and we hope that Hong Kong will get over this. And I blame some of these problems on the Brits. Us Brits not invested sufficiently in education. So it's a complicated area. It's not as simple. It's not a simple situation. It's also about identity, the freedom to speak Cantonese. Let's not go there now, but we hope it can calm down.
Values and aspirations, generational gaps. Yes.
Expansive question, but in infrastructure and looking well into the future, as a political economist, what could possibly, China's doing such long-range planning and locking up resources all over the cycles of things. When it seems like China has, a leader in perpetuity, and how do you take that out of the equation, and how much better suited the future looks to an economy that is so far-reaching, and just it seems like the only thing that has a similar viewpoint or perspective is our intelligence network, maybe.
I don't know you, but thank you for throwing that softball again for time. The struggle, as Xi Jinping would say so many times this year, is the differences in the system that we live in. A market democracy, can it be efficient? Can it work? Are we going to impeach our president? Are we going to even start thinking about it? How much money and time is going to be wasted on this? And what are we doing in the election? And what is our Congress doing about anything? And then another system that, like I said, I'm agnostic about these terms because it means nothing. Democracy, Singapore is democracy. This is democracy. They're not the same democracy. And so is Japan. But then, when you talk about dictatorship, authoritarianism, right, we're talking about basically a non-market facing, a non-sort of multi-party political system. Can that be more efficient? Absolutely. Are there downsides? A lot. And so the two systems solve, which for us we live through in the technology realm, but I think everybody will be living through it in every way. And infrastructure is a wonderful example, which is why we really need to investigate what is happening. And Belt and Road is merely an example. Asia needs by 2030 $27 trillion of infrastructure. When Sri Lanka says we need a port, are they going to call, OPEC, who's one of my speakers? No, because what American institutions have failed is after the 60s and 70s, and of course later the Japanese came in to promote basically infrastructure, they say, we need to have more, structure. We need to basically not only take the money, we need to have girls go to school, we need to these standards and governance and human rights, and of course we want to have public-private partnership. And all these things mean that the U.S. solutions to the infrastructure problem in the world is very small. There's no way, not even a small percentage of the 27 billion. So as Sri Lanka, would you not take the money for your port? I would take China any day. But knowing all the problems, knowing that it could be a debt trap, and knowing that one day China could own the port. But there's no alternative. There's China. And India wasn't going to, they're not going to take Indian money. So that's a good, but I think, for example, an Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, for the United States to try to block it, it's really ridiculous. But at the same time, the Chinese, and this Duncan can speak about, basically when AIIB was going to start, people started to call me and say, what do you think about what this is happening? You were both a banker and a political economist. I say the real issue is that China had the capacity and the capability to actually do due diligence in these deals and actually have what the Chinese love to call a win-win situation for Sri Lanka and for China. And I think that initially China was just trying to dump its excess capacity in steel and coal. And of course, if they couldn't buy their steel and coal and cement, we will lend you the money because they also had too much capital. And we'll lend you the money to buy things from us. And in the end, if you go bankrupt, well, it's just too bad. And this is a real issue, is that banking in China for the last 30 years remained the same. They don't lend based on cash flow. They don't lend based on, forecast. It's still whom you know, and they still lend to SOEs much more than startups. And that's really how I got into the business. I wanted actually to be a world bank. I said, okay, I'll just be a banker, because I found out it worked out great. I said, my God, I get money to people like Jack Ma. It's much faster than working at the World Bank. I was actually in development without doing it, quote, in the development way. And I think today, too, for most of you who are interested in development, either in development or in finance, there's many ways to get into something without thinking about it in the mainstream way. And I think AIIB is actually still a tiny percentage of China's Belt and Road Initiative is going out. Most of it is still state-owned enterprises making actually low return investments in countries that are really not very profitable.
Some are losing a lot of money.
Yes, and there's a lot of backlash. There's a lot of backlash in China now among the Chinese saying, why are you invested in Kazakhstan when we have all these problems in our different provinces? So it's a long story to tell you to please come on November 15th.
I would just say, I think the best guide to this is Monty Python, The Life of Brian, when these guys, the rebels, Palestinian rebels, getting together and say, what have the Romans ever done for us? And somebody says, yeah, what else? And then so there's a positive aspect of China development overseas as well as all the negative stuff. And the more that it's state-driven or state-owned enterprise-driven, you tend to get more of this problem. Not that entrepreneurs are always perfect, but it's not just one block. And that's what you have to understand who you're dealing with on the Chinese side. And unfortunately, at the moment, you just shout it out. I'll repeat it.
Do you think in the long run that this authoritarian government is sustainable even despite the growth? I guess what I'm saying is is it possible? What is the mindset of the young people growing up in China? Are they completely okay with the government being authoritarian, or is it is there a general idea that there is some democracy in the guys?
Are young people okay with long-term straight of an authoritarian government in China? Shirley.
Yes, I'm going to start with that. And Duncan knows a lot in the field. I know a lot from a different angle because I teach basically the last 10 years, half the year at UVA, half the year in China, Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, 60% of my students are from mainland China. So I basically teach in China. It's a very big part of my long-term project to write about educating Chinese and educating Americans. I would say that my students in China and my Chinese students, mainland Chinese students in the United States and in Hong Kong are eager for more than actually anybody else I know. But this is in context. Wanting freedom is something that's aspirational, and achieving it involves something different. So today, of course, you see in Hong Kong, there are those who want to achieve it through violence. There are those who achieve it through going to protest after protest. I live 5 minutes away from Victoria Park when I'm in Hong Kong, in Causeway Bay, where the protest always starts. So I see primarily all of my students this summer were very, very involved. There's a real difference in terms of how people think about it, and most of them are very peaceful. But I think that today, the issue of the other issue of our time is young people. In just the last 18 months, I have taught in Taipei, Beijing, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, and Charlottesville. So it's been a really intense period of time for me. And I try to teach the same course in all of them so I can compare how they react to things like climate change, for example. And I try to ask the same question and get their response. But I would say that the struggle for many Chinese students, in my personal take, and there are some of you better, and generalization is very dangerous for a country that has 1.3 billion people. But one of the things about my Chinese students is for the last 10 years, most of them are the only child. So actually, they demand more than my other students. Most of my Hong Kong and Taiwanese students are also the only child, but not in Virginia. And I think that Chinese students expect a lot of the society they live in, of themselves. They want to get ahead and succeed more than many of my other students because the pressure is really great. But on the other hand, the struggle is between nationalism and liberalism. And this is something that actually is not Chinese specific. I think it's happening all around the world for Russians. And I know Duncan also goes to Russia, and we back from St. Petersburg. Russian young people are increasingly nationalistic, but also very liberal. They believe in a lot of the Western values, but they want Russia to be the center of Europe. And I think a lot of Chinese too want China to be the center of the world, and they espouse liberal values, and when they contradict, there's something quite tricky. And a lot of the students come talk to me, and we speak for hours about what it means to be so proud of being Chinese during the Olympics, and so proud of being Chinese when we have such great companies like Alibaba, but so concerned when there are things happening that doesn't fit what they're feeling of being proud. And this is actually the basis of what happened to me after I left finance. I wrote a book about Taiwan's economic policy towards China, and originally being completely stupid to this, I thought, oh, I'm just going to have lots of data and be an economist. And then the whole book changed, and the book basically is about national identity and its relation to economic policy. A very small field at the time that has become huge now. And it discusses basically the basis of mercantilism. I think that most people feel like you want efficiency, you want economic priorities, but at the same time, most people vote with their heart, and they feel very nationalistic, and therefore you have to reconcile. Do you really want to go see the Houston Rockets, or do you want to show patriotism and cheer up that ticket that costs you 20,000 RMB? There is the question of our time. Thank you very much for coming.